All right, everyone, this is going to be the Pix4D hands-on exercise session. Everyone is shuffling in from the other presentation room and is going to be taking their seats. For those of you that are on the virtual sessions, if you can get your Pix4D exercise step 0 up, we'll be referring to that just for a overview of where the buttons and levers are at in Pix4D. It's going to probably take a few minutes for us to go through not just some introductory slides, but also for people to get their data unzipped and get logged into all the classroom computers. So my guess is that we will be a little bit after the hour, 5 or 10 minutes for everyone to get all set up and logged in on their computers. And again, you can try to set up your Pix4D on your computer as well. If for any reason you are not able to log in, then put it in the virtual chat. Our virtual moderator isn't here quite yet. He's also moving over from the other auditorium, but as soon as he's here, he can problem shoot any kind of licensing issues. Oh, our virtual moderator showed up. It'll be a couple minutes for him to get set up though. Yes, sir. Oh, excellent. Yes. We have paper handouts for the folks that are in the classroom. Of course, that's not feasible for those of you that are virtual. If you're virtual, what I recommend, if you can refer to the email that I sent out with the exercise directions and set that up on either an adjacent screen or adjacent computer or on a tablet. Sometimes that's helpful to be able to look at your screen and then refer to another screen for the directions, since we only have so much real estate on our window sometimes. Okay, it looks like pretty much everybody is here. Well, I'm going to go through a very brief presentation and really an introduction to a couple topics. While I'm doing that, I'll let you get set up on your computers. If you look up on the screen over here, you'll see the CSU under CSUMB, the user and DroneCamp 1, 2, 3, 4 are going to be the logins for the computers in here. So you'll only be able to log in with one, say DroneCamp 1 or DroneCamp 2 on each computer. So I'm going to go around the room really quick and I'll just let you count off so you know what your number is. So when you go to user, again, you'll go capital D, DroneCamp. 1 will be the first person, and then 2, and so on. So from here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, and one more person came in. You're 26. Okay, so we have 20. Oh, did I miss you? I believe that you do need to. Yes. If it worked on one, that's interesting. The IT person said that we needed to have them separated out. Did you what's that? It didn't work. Try 27. So is for you all virtually, we're setting up the classroom here for individual logins. I'm going to have to go a little bit of data orientation as well, some of which will apply to the virtual participants. So currently I'm just answering some questions about the login information, if you cannot hear. I just did a sound check before we started. And again, once my colleague gets set up on a virtual moderation, he'll be able to answer your questions. He's just getting his computer all logged in right now. Good. Yes, sir. Okay, let's try this. See, have a couple people try to log into DroneCamp 1. If that works, that's fine. Maybe I'm misinterpreting what our classroom IT persons told me to do. Again, we'll get going in just a moment. If anybody can't see the information over there, then you can take a picture with your phone if you feel so inclined, and then you can have it for reference at your computer. I know it's at a hard angle for many of you. And there was a question over here. Oh, okay, so on the Pix4D, what will happen, there's the username and then the password that's on the screen there. So there's a certain number of classroom licenses that will be available. There's 25 through CSUMB, and we have 25 as well. A number of those have already been locked down. They're floating licenses, and they're locked computers. If we need to, we can clear some of ours off. I think that we don't have too many people to need to do that in here. There's so if you try the first username and the password, and when you look on, if you see that there's like 1 of or 10 of 25, and then the next person's 9 of 25, when you run out, then switch to the second user, the stfire at UCANR.edu, and the password there. And so then you can get set up. Good. Yes. Oh, let me double check so a couple new people came in, it was the question. And for those of you that tried to log in on the computers with DroneCamp 1, and several of you were able to do that. Okay, there's correction. Just log in to user DroneCamp 1. That's fine. All right, while everyone gets set up, and again, we want to welcome you to another hopefully great session. This is going to be data processing day and analysis and visualization later on. We have it looks like a great perfect size group here. We have 3 instructors in the classroom, which I'm going to introduce, starting off with myself. We did do introductions briefly on day 1, but some of that was missed and some people weren't able to hear that. Again, my name is Sean Hogan. I am an academic coordinator for the Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources of the University of California. Specialty is in remote sensing. So when drone technology came along, I was already quite familiar with photogrammetry and most things related to either aerial or satellite imagery. So drone image processing was pretty intuitive for me at that point. One of the things I always like to preface my presentations with is I wish that this kind of technology was available way back in the old days when I would look at stereoscopes and try to do topographic lines on the very old historic imagery. Now the software applications out there like Pix4D that we'll be using today is one of the most powerful of those. It's amazing. It would take a team of 1,000 people 25 years to create an elevation model that you can do now overnight on a laptop computer. Maggie, I know she explained some of the process for photogrammetry, but one of the key things that it does is the imagery auto detects key points between overlapping images and uses those points to lock them together, and then creates a point cloud that then is densified to even more detail. That number of points is just by hand is not practical, but on a project you might have millions. I saw a project recently, I had over 100 million key points for it was a large project, but it's you can have amazing things that you can get out of this type of data. I will let my colleagues introduce themselves. I'll step back a little bit and let Shane Fire introduce himself. He's going to be a virtual moderator, but he also might be floating around the classroom.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Shane Fire. I am the GIS manager / supervisor for the IGIS team. I've been doing GIS for 20 some odd years, and my specialty is using ArcGIS, Esri software, and other GIS software. So I'm here to help you all answer questions and just be here to help y'all do what you want to do. So welcome and thank you for coming in.
Chris, you have a mic of your own, or do you want to? You might be muted. I have to set you up as a co-host, unless Shane can do that. So just, there we go.
Hello.
There you go.
It's going to be coming out of there. But
Okay, this is a little odd. I'll walk over to Chris. You won't be seeing him on the screen, but you do see him on the shared
Yeah, that'll be fine.
presentation.
That'll work.
Okay, here he comes.
I
Thank you. Thank you.
quit dragging me around, Sean. I'm Chris Greer. I'm with the University of California Cooperative Extension. I'm a plant pathologist and integrated pest management advisor in San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties, and use a lot of multispectral imaging for plant disease and pest management research and coastal crops. So we can talk a little bit more about that if you have specific questions.
So, and Chris was a former DroneCamp alumni or member, and now you can see kind of as a trend, we have former participants coming back as instructors. And since the DroneCamp years ago in UC San Diego that he attended, he's got to the point, at least this season, I believe Chris has flown and processed data for every single week of the season since, I think he said last night, March. So he's been kicking the tires on Pix4D in many ways, some of which I don't even use that or do that often. Good. So I'm going to just cover some house cleaning things here. If you haven't already in your virtual, if you download the data that was sent out in the emails before, you'll need to unzip that data. That's going to apply for everybody in the classroom here as well. We'll need you to unzip that data. There's going to be a little bit of a difference in the classroom versus the virtual participants in that the data in the classroom is on the T drive. The IT folks that set the computers up in here needed to put it on the T drive. So anywhere in the directions it says C, it's really the T drive. And you will also have to unzip your data. Again, this applies to virtual participants as well as us. If you right click on the data in the files that you've downloaded, put them in a DC 2022 folder on either your C drive if you're virtual, and it's already on the T drive in here, you'll just unzip it. And you then, once it's unzipped, you can delete your zip file so you don't have a ton of extra hard drive space used up. A reminder, if you could stay on mute, that would be very nice. If you have a problem, you can put it in the chat, or it's for in-person participants, you can just raise your hand. We might be getting some sticky notes to put on the computers here in a few moments that if you want to not keep your hand raised the whole time, you can just put them up, but we'll have to get that set up once we get moving with the exercise. If you get far behind, do not worry. Everybody works at the material at a different pace. Some people are very used to these sorts of applications, and so their former expertise have already prepared them to go through the material. Don't worry if you get behind. I will cover some suggestions that you might use for reviewing the material if you've missed something that we said. Note this session is also being recorded just like the other concurrent sessions. All of the presentations and exercise, including this, will be put together for video links that you can refer to next week. Again, welcome to Introduction to Multispectral Image Processing with Pix4D Mapper. I'm not going to dive into what what's best or not best about Pix4D Mapper, but just to know it is one of the most powerful photogrammetry applications out there right now. We considered having Agisoft Metashape at DroneCamp this year, but which is another very powerful application, but there's questions of availability since it's a Russian company. But I use that and I like them. I wouldn't say equally. I prefer Pix4D Mapper because it is easier and it's intuitive and there's a lot less buttons and levers to push, but the other application is very, very good too. There's also Open Drone Map that does certain processing that's for open source processing. And as well as this afternoon, we'll have the Drone Deploy. It's a commercial application, this is an online application. And there is the stitching within ArcGIS Pro application we'll go through. The thing with that though, is it doesn't handle multispectral image processing. Many of the steps are somewhat similar between the different applications. But the GUI, where the buttons and levers are at are much different. And some of them have different photogrammetry engines running under the hood that will render different or better or worse results sometimes. I have the link here to the data, but most of you have already received the data. But this presentation, by the way, is in the presentation slides that you have in case you need to refer to this at any point, particular for virtual attendees. I don't want to take all the credit for developing this exercise because a number of my colleagues, including Shane, Dr. Maggie Kelly that just did the presentation, a couple of her graduate students, Annie Taylor and Chippy Chislick, have helped out. Robert Johnson, who unfortunately normally would be here, but he hurt himself last week and wasn't able to attend. And then Andy Lyons. We've all collaborated on some way or another to put together this exercise material, as well as then afterwards having Dr. Chris Greer help us out as well. Something that, and this pertains more, oh, we have a question over here. We're good. Yes, okay. We had one of the facilities people come and ask, as well as Pat, to see how we're doing in here. And I mentioned keeping your Zoom muted. Click, if you have questions, put them in. Most of you, after a year plus 2 years of COVID and Zoom sessions galore, you're probably very used to some of this, but not, I can't always assume that. So on the bottom of your Zoom session, you'll see participants and chat. This is where you can reach out to us if you have questions or needs. I already said keep yourself muted, and we are good to go. How is everybody with their data? Again, this goes to online folks as well as everyone in here. Were you able to unzip the data? Okay, good. Okay, so there was a question, someone is not able to get into account. If you could move to another computer, that might be good, because it sounds like one of the computers is already locked down to another login and it can't be logged out. Purposefully, I have set up this exercise to kind of have what I'd call a slow start, but a paced start. So while I talk, everyone can get set up at their leisure, and you're not going to be missing any kind of hands-on material. You're not going to build on this other than you're going to build on the knowledge that I'm going to cover here in a moment. So for all of you, I know that those of you who are in here, you're not on the Zoom, but we're going to do the same thing for the Zoom crowd too. I am going to go around very quick, and I'm just going to ask, I'm going to skip names and affiliations right now because we have so many people in here and we're not all on Zoom. I was going to see what your comfort level is with Pix4D, because once in a while we have experts. I had a class one time, there was someone that knew the software better than anyone else I'd ever met. And I was like, okay, I'm the instructor, but you've done things that are amazing with this application. So I'm going to check this with go around and we'll find out if you're on a scale of 1 to 5 on how comfortable you are, so we can gauge how fast I go through the material. For those that are on the virtual links, if you could just type in this information that you see on the screen right here in the chat, your name, affiliation, and comfort level with Pix4D, then we can kind of consolidate that. And after I cover a couple more things, to again test our speed. And I assume most people are not used to Pix4D as it is. So go ahead and we'll go around here while everyone on the virtual line tests. Yes, sir. Okay, yes, tech support for the computers themselves. Oh, okay. Oh yeah, if you'd like so for those that are virtual, we're checking to see about tech support for computers. Yeah, if you can help out anyone, and there's also Jonathan is doing tech support in the next 117. So it is yeah. Okay, great, thank you. So that was Justin Cummings to help coordinate this event, asking about tech support. So I'm going to go around just on a scale of 1 to 5. How comfortable are you with Pix4D? Brand new. 1. 2. Okay. What's that? 1. Okay. Actually, let's do this. Have everybody just put up your hand like 1 to 5. That'll make it easier. 1, 1, 1, 2. A lot of almost half 2s and half 1s. Okay, good. Let me look on the chat to see what we have there. So let's see. Mostly 1s. Okay, good. Very good. Okay, so I tend to assume that people coming to a workshop such as this are just getting going with this, but it's not always a great assumption. Once in a while, I'll show up to an event and again, I'll have people that are nearly experts in it, and then I'll change the pace. Good. We already did the introductions. We already talked about how to download in the pre-emails. So learning goals for today. So hardware requirements, drone data is big data and processing it is enormous. So you might collect with a multispectral flight with a red edge camera about 12 to 13 gigabytes of data. But when you process that, it usually multiplies that number by about 3 to 5 times, depending on what kind of products you create out of your processing. That processing takes a lot of computational horsepower to do that. So what I always recommend is having at least 8 gigabytes of RAM, and that's the bare minimum. 12 to 16 is a much better number. We usually run 64 gigs of RAM on our large computers, the RAM being your temporary memory. The reason for that is through the processing, a lot of that point cloud data that I was talking about has to be held in temporary memory to construct the data products that you'll come up with later. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, this is a good point. And I'm gonna revisit what Shane just mentioned, that Pix4D is computationally hungry. It will use every resource that your computer has. And I mean, like almost every little bit. So it's hard to even browse on the internet because it's going to be running your entire CPU, using up all your RAM. Sometimes you'll fill your hard drive space up. It just really is it's a heavy computational application. When we get into, when I go through the orientation of where some of the processing steps are at, I'll show you how to lower that processing down a little bit. Again, so having lots of RAM and multiple cores for a parallel processing on your computer is very advisable. Good. We're going to cover the stages of processing. I mentioned before that most photogrammetry softwares have similar, sometimes different names, but very similar processing steps. We talk about how to load and verify your imagery. There's sometimes you'll see issues, and this pertains largely to when you first get your imagery from the field, and then you take a look at it, and you'll realize, oh, this is not going to work out so well for me because it's either blurry or whatever. But also, I'll show you how to look at the EXIF data. The EXIF data for an image is usually hidden from your site in your windows, but it's attached to each image. It's like a background file that's invisible on your normal window directory. In those EXIF files that are attached to each image from a drone, there's telemetry data usually from that were written on at the same time as that image was captured. So with the altitude or the height, the latitude, longitude information, sometimes the orientation, and sometimes the error. We'll look at that in the Pix4D. It'll read that information in. Sometimes, if with some cameras, that EXIF data is written in different ways, and the software doesn't know how to interpret it. I just want to put that disclaimer out there. Correct geopositioning of your data sets. We'll go through that during this exercise. This is a good time to mention those of you, particularly those of the that are on virtual, you may have temporary licenses, and we have found in the past that Pix4D's temporary licenses sometimes let you do some things, sometimes they won't let you do it. It kind of depends on every 4 to 6 months, they'll change the processing power of the temporary licenses, but you'll be able to see how to go through it in at least where the steps are at, even if you're not having to manually do some of the steps that we'll do during the full exercise. We'll go through radiometric calibration of multispectral data. We've maybe briefly touched on that in various sessions, some of which were outside when we talked about autonomous flights with some groups. Radiometric calibration is comparing the downwelling of light to what's received at the sensor, because a normal picture has just what's called a digital number, and depending on the bits of the camera, sometimes it's 8-bit, which should be 256 values. If you get out 12, it jumps like 4,000 something, and then so on. It depends on what the bit rate of your camera is. That's going to be a digital number that's going to be associated with your red and your green and your blue, your near infrared. Well, we want to calibrate that to reflectance, and reflectance is 1 being completely bright and 0 being, of course, dark, like completely dark. If you calibrate to reflectance, then you can compare imagery from day to day to know that things are you're comparing apples to apples. Bit rate value, or DN, digital number, is this hasn't been calibrated, isn't comparable between dates. So we'll look at that. We'll recognize some of the fundamentals of processing, the processing quality report. That'll be one of the earlier things that we'll cover. And then understanding the file structure. I actually could have put some of these in the reverse order, because one of the first things I'll jump to next will be the file structure. I know that that Shane and Andy went over some file information yesterday and for data management. And so there might be a little bit of a slight bit of redundancy here, but knowing where your data goes and how you're going to organize it is very important. Good. The last slide, again, these are in the presentation, under the presentation link that I sent you this morning and yesterday. So if you want to refer to the agenda, the exercise, or the data, it's there again. Good. With that, is there anything that anyone else wants to add here? Okay, good. That was some no head shakes. Good. Oh yeah. Okay, good. There we go. Oh shoot. How do we get rid of that? There we go. Good. So I'm going to rely on my colleagues here to pass on any chat information, since I won't have that there. Get out of the slide. Good. And Now I'm going to go to the data. PC, C drive in my case, you can see I'm getting low on hard drive space there. Again, big data. I've created a DroneCamp 2022 folder, just like what you all will have on your drives, hopefully. And inside that, I've already unzipped my data. Again, this is it. If you're on the computers in here, you'll be working on the T drive instead of C drive. If this was zipped, I would have right-clicked it, gone to 7-zip as my preferred decompression software, and then extract here. And then this would be the folder that you'll see after you've done this. Is hopefully, if anyone's on the virtual and cannot, if this is too small, just let me know. I'm going to go inside of this folder now, and you'll see the exercise 0 material that was sent out earlier to help you get prepared for this workshop. I'm going to use that exercise to show you where the buttons and levers are in the workflow. And then I'm going to stop and let people work at their own pace to work through the multispectral exercise in its entirety, or as far as you can go. For now, I'm going to go inside of the step 0 exercise folder and show that I have data. I have the project file folder, and I have the Pix4D project. Pix4D acts as really like a GIS. I guess technically you could classify it as a GIS. And usually a GIS will have I call it the parent file that knows where all the children data are at. And how that works is you have this one just on the bottom, in this case, the Pix4D file that then will organize the data products, which are in the folder here, and connect that to the data, which is the imagery that was collected in the field. If you ever move your data from one computer to another, this all has to be in the same relative position or the project breaks. I mean, and it like just will not open. And so you got to keep the file organization the same. If for any reason during the workshop, and this pertains to people that open their data on a different drive or they've downloaded, I can show you how to repoint the Pix4D project to the correct data for it to work again. I think Pix4D has made that easier, and I found a workaround to make it easy for everyone to avoid having that be an issue. So again, here's the data folder. Data refers to the data that was collected in the field, hopefully using some kind of naming convention that gives you a little bit of metadata. So data about the data, say like the date, the location, the type of imagery that you're collecting. And inside of that, you'll see a whole bunch of images. And when I say a whole bunch, this is actually a little teeny set of data because it's not feasible to use one of our larger projects that might have 10,000 images. It just would not process or be functional in a classroom, and we wouldn't be able to share it effectively. Again, big data. I mentioned the EXIF file data. If you can see, if you hover over it, you get some information about a photo, but if you right click and go to properties, and this, by the way, is just for info only. You don't have to be doing this yourself if you don't wish to. You can follow along, but you don't have to. You can see inside of there's general information, but you can go over to details. Those details are coming from the EXIF file that you don't see here in your window image, but are hidden behind each one of these files. So you can see information about the latitude, longitude, altitude that I mentioned before, and you can see where the location of the data resides on your computer. If I was in the field, I might double click on one of these images just to make sure it's relatively clear. And I'm not going to expand this right now, but I know the data is fairly clear. Just as an aside, just because where one type of the drone course or DroneCamp curriculum leaves off, another thing takes off. Just as a side note, because I know that many of you are going to be out in the field possibly and collecting data than to process data. Having knowledge about the processing will help inform you how to better collect your data. As just a little tip, whenever you fly over, say, a forested area like we have right here, you need to fly at least double the height of the trees, up to the 400-foot ceiling, that is. The reason for that is that the camera's focal length is going to give you give you better focus of the ground and the tops of the trees. Wherein if you're flying right over the tops of the trees, either the top of the tree will be in focus or the ground will be in focus. If one's not in focus, then you're not going to get, your photogrammetry is not going to know what to do with those unfocused areas. So just as a kind of just a little, I've learned the hard way doing that or flying certain ways before. So here's the data. I'm going to move back. So going back up a level to above data, you'll see a GCP file. This was rendered from a Trimble Geo7X that was differentially corrected. So it was, in other words, I took regular GPS data on a Trimble and made it extremely accurate. And we'll refer to this file later to be able to position our products to, I would say exact, but pretty dang close to exact position on the ground within the GIS. So imagine you take a whole bunch of pictures through your scene, and with the flying in your lawnmower pattern, for example, each of those positions telemetry data that's in the EXA file I just showed you, the latitude and longitude, it will give an exact number, but that exact number isn't really accurate because GPS coordinates drift a fair bit. When it's all stitched together to create a product, if you use those ground control target points to shift it all into position, everything will be in alignment. So you can either do data fusion, where you combine one data set, like a thermal data set, to a multispectral data set for analysis, but also for change detection. So if you fly today, tomorrow, the next day, and say the GPS shift, the drift is off differently, which usually it is, then those images will line up if you use these GCPs. I'll open those up just now so you can see what they look like. This, by the way, needs to be a CSV file. And it's pretty simple. I got a comment, just the location, 1, the X and the Y are in what's called Universal Transverse Mercator. It's a coordinate system in meters. It's sort of analogous to latitude and longitude, but it's designed specifically for the scale and the use of drone imagery. The reason for that is that UTM, or Universal Transverse Mercator, it's designed as a projected coordinate system across the Earth. If you, for GIS purposes at least, if you tell someone that building over there is 0.000002 of a degree of longitude from you, that is not really meaningful. It's really not really meaningful within the GIS or the Pix4D application either. But if it knows that position is 150 meters, then that makes sense. So that's why the Universal Transverse Mercator is used. The X value is off of a meridian line, a north-south line. It's meters to the east or the west. So X is sometimes called your easting. And then Y is the number of meters from the equator. There was a question here.
Yeah, so why are there like 7 different points? Maybe 1.
Oh, this is a great question. It'll make sense when we get going on it. The question is, why are there 7 points? That's because we have 7 ground control targets on the ground. These are the positions on the ground that will be visible in the imagery that we will correct to. Good. I know a lot of this information might not make sense, but once you get going, it will. And then knowing what we're looking at will say, oh, I remember what that was for and why I'm using it now. That's why I'm going to the data first. Backing back up now, Pix4D, and I wish there was, I would really, really like it if Pix4D thought through their data products and their file structure better. It is not ideal. It definitely is not ideal because once you process your data, then you have to move it all over the place and rename it often to actually work with your projects. So inside of your Pix4D exercise folder that's associated with the project name, you'll see that there's a file folder again, and then the project. They have to have the same name and they have to go together, as I mentioned before. Yes, sir.
Question online, is the minimum or maximum
Oh, that's actually a great question, and it was asked the other day. So is there a maximum or a minimum number of GCPs that you should have? Minimum is 4. Technically you could have 3, but 4 is kind of conventionally known as the minimum. Maximum, there is no maximum. However, the more you're gonna have a major diminishing point of return for the more GCPs that you use and put out there. It depends. It depends on the area, the size of the area, and the precision that you need. The GCPs, so the ground control targets that you're tying your imagery to, if your imagery is collected in a way, for example, like with an RTK, where the relative error is going to be almost the same throughout the whole entire scene, 4 is going to be enough. If you're covering a large area with a drone that has kind of a sloppy GPS, like the Inspire 1 that we had out there earlier, you might want more points. You want more points also if you cover a very large area. And if you're processing in chunks where you process one flight here and another flight here and another flight here, you might need 4 per area. If you process them all together, you can often get away with having 5. I like to have 1 on each corner roughly, and then 1 in the center, and then it shifts it into position quite nicely. If you have 12 GCPs, you're going to be wasting your time largely because you'll get 95% of the correction that you need with the first 5 to 10 GCPs. I know that's a complex answer to what seemed like a simple question, but hopefully that helps. Next, I'm going to go into the data. This is the way Pix4D spits out the processing. You'll have a densified point cloud, which I'm not going to get into much because that's really a niche that most of us won't ever be diving into. It's that usually is in 3D modeling. We've had someone in years past who's in Peru right now that has talked about the densification and using that in R to be able to do structural analysis, but that data is usually not needed for most GIS applications. But the DSM, or the digital surface model, and orthomosaic are interesting. DSM, digital surface model, refers to the surface rendered for the tops of the canopy that you're looking at, not the ground below it, but just the top. Remember, photogrammetry, you need to have multiple look points between multiple images to be able to create the point cloud that is being rendered to generate the products. That if you can't see through, you're just going to get the surface of the top. That's the digital surface model. A digital terrain model refers to the actual ground below the imagery. The mosaic, that is created at the same time as your digital surface model. Actually, it's the digital surface model is created first, and then the orthomosaic is created on top of that. This is where you'll find your orthomosaic. So under DSM, you'll see ortho, DSM, mosaic, and then under extras is where you have the digital terrain model, the undersurface. Why it's buried a little deeper, I do not know. Good. So again, these are all generated at the same time. You'll have, one thing that's interesting, sometimes your orthomosaic will have a transparent layer in there, or sometimes called an alpha layer. So it'll be rendered in red, green, blue, and a transparent layer. So you'll actually have what's called 4 bands of data. Why they do that, I have no idea, but you can opt out of having the data products created that way. Then there's also tiles. If you want to work with tiles, I usually delete those because they just use up hard disk space, and I want to have all the data in one layer. Good. All this stuff is going to make more sense to you also when you jump into the GIS sessions later this afternoon. So now I'm going to open up this project file.
Hold on.
Yes, the question.
You can show them more, but did you want to show 'em where the quality report is? Just.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
So actually, that's great, Chris.
So you can look at it without.
That's actually a great point. I was going to talk about the quality report in just a moment. So great minds think alike, I think, sometimes. And that's one of the next steps that I will talk about just after this. If you downloaded the data and you go inside of that folder and you open up the project, you'll see the results here. There's not results so much in this image, but you'll see the actual project. This includes these little blue dots that you'll see. Those are those GCPs. The red dots indicate the photo points where images were collected. If you bring in a project, you always want to check to make sure that those points are where you think they should be. I've had sometimes where there's one way off to the side, and that's either a camera error or maybe your drone didn't fly where you thought it should be flying. So you want to make sure that this is what it looks like. Sometimes the background kind of glitches and you don't see it come in as well. There's this project has already been processed, so you will have a quality report that I'll refer to in a second. But first, I'm going to go to what's called the ray cloud. If this pops up, then your Pix4D is working. I see a number of people in here that are kind of following along. Again, you don't have to follow along now if you don't want to. I'm going to span that out. And this pertains to what you'll be seeing in the quality report. And one of the reasons why I'm kind of going a little slightly different order than what Chris and I have presented in the past is that these are the photo points that are in blue. And I'll rotate this. If I click the sphere at the top and look down, you'll see this is a rendering of where the images, the telemetry data from the images said that the images were at in their orientation. And then once the ground control targets were put in, it corrected those points up to the green locations using kind of reverse engineering of where those points on the ground were relative to where the images should have been when they were collected, using complex geometry equations, and sometimes again in the millions, because there's a whole bunch of points that can be seen within multiple images, and that's how the photogrammetry works, is the relative geometry differences between these different points and the images that can see them. Referring to the quality report, once you've processed this data, I'll shift to that and I'll see which one this is. This is it right here, same flight. What you'll see is a quality report. Sometimes you can just click on usually at the top left-hand corner, and this might not work because of moving it from computer to computer. The pathways are a little different. There's a quality report option there, but this is what the quality report looks like. Oops, my Zoom window's in the way. There we go. Your quality report is something you'll look at usually after the first stage of processing in Pix4D, and definitely at the end to see how it looks. The green check marks usually indicate that it's all good. In this case, the last one is showing georeferencing as an exclamation mark. That's not to be a worry, because that just indicates that you put in ground control targets and that force the shifting of the imagery, at least for ground sample distances away from where the original telemetry data thought it should be. That's not a concern, because for GSD or ground sample distances, it's like 5 inches. That's always going to happen when you adjust it. The other things that you'll look at here are how many matches there are, the camera orientation, the data set, and sometimes most importantly for reporting purposes is the ground sample distance itself. When this case is 1.84 inches, I think, if I read that right. So 1.84 inches. I always look at that just to see what the results are. And again, this was touched on yesterday, but the ground sample distance is your pixel resolution on the ground. That's how much area each pixel should cover. Yes.
There's one question in the chat. If you're working on the estimation of soil moisture content, will you still consider DSM?
So so the question was if you're considering soil moisture, would DSM products be of interest? The answer is probably. The reason being is the topographic shape of the ground is going to naturally work with water flows. And so if you have a ditch, for example, that's just where water is going to pass, and it's going to and it might be of interest to the study. It doesn't, for soil moisture, you can't see below the surface. You can't prove that there's water below it, but it does indicate, it is a good indicator for certain questions or answers to questions that you might have about that. Good. Now back to the quality report. So you have the average sample distance, you have camera type and that sort of thing that's through here. The area covered, by the way, the area covered is not the actual area on the ground. If I go back to my Pix4D project and I look at it, oh, I have several projects open, and I rotate around, the area on the ground that I think is most important is just the footprint under the images and nothing outside of it. You get a lot of panoramic distortion on those outside areas, wherein the area that's actually has good fidelity and is reliable is underneath those images and sometimes within those images. So you're looking down on it nadir. You get both spectral and spatial distortion the further out you go. Back to the quality report. I'm not going to go through this ad nauseum. They're in the exercise directions. There's a link to Pix4D that explains this in considerable detail. I have it up here somewhere. The quality report information, a link to this of what every one of these elements means is included here with further descriptions. Other things that you will want to look at though, you'll see if you have really like red highlighted oblong shifts, that might indicate that there's something wrong with usually the direction that the camera is pointing, and you can remove those images and then reprocess. You want to always have at least 5 images overlapping each other image to be able to create enough key points to do your processing correctly. And that all green is what you see there. You don't want to have too much red, even though red is going to naturally occur on the edges of the flight area, because those don't have further adjacent images that are collected. We don't need to worry about the correlation of camera parameters. I never worry about that, but I do look at this sometimes. You can see where there's greater sized circles around some of the points. That's the predicted spatial error of those points. Key thing to look at here is just to make sure that you have an even, or hopefully even, overlap of each one. We have a question over here. Okay. Okay, so the root mean squared error is a question of kind of explanation of what that is. That is, and the really detailed version of that is not on the top of my head, but in simplified terms, that is based off of the Pythagorean theorem, and oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I understand. Okay, got it. So, but as a continuation of what I was going to say, it's that RMSE, or root mean squared error, is how far off a point is from where it should be at. The thing is when you put in your ground control targets, that RMSE will jump way up because it's using those ground control points to say, wow, we're way over here away from where the calibrated GPS is at. So you can expect to have a high RMSE after that, but it's the data product when you actually process it with the GCPs used to improve the positioning. The resulting RMSE needs to be tested again with something called type or with checkpoints. And so that's why sometimes you put out other GCPs just to check to see if it's actually what the true RMSE is, and you'll have to calculate that yourself outside of this GIS. This reports what the error is relative to the positions of the GCPs. So, okay, so that's a good question. Yes. Okay. That's a good, okay, so a number of people, and why this happens sometimes, but not always, is kind of a mystery to me. So people that, and this goes for those of you that are on virtual, if you open up the project and it doesn't come in like this, let me see, I'll go to the exercise directions and show you where the answer to your question is at. It should be, I put a little create.
I thought the images would be in your data folder.
They should be.
Their data folder.
What? The data folder is empty? Okay. Okay, so we have a couple technical issues. We're going to take a break here anyways, a 10-minute break. I'm going to show you where the data is, how the correction is usually done. Trying to find, wait a minute. There's, okay. I will be right there. What we'll do here is I'm gonna, because we've been going nearly an hour, I want to take a break, and then I will help out a couple of people both virtually, but also in the classroom. And I'm going to figure out what happened to the data. Somehow or another, it didn't get transferred to the computers, apparently. I see it is transferred for some people though. Okay. Okay, so the question was is where if you don't see the data in the folder, what you need to do is it'll give you a pop-up in the center of your screen. The directions for that, and I don't recall right here where it's at. There is a disclaimer here somewhere for how to correct that on the exercise directions. But what you do is you just go and set the pathway to your T drive instead of your C drive and point it there and then say, okay, and it should be able to come up thereafter. Hopefully those of you that set it up on your virtual computers, you're not having any problems. I'm not getting nods from Justin here saying that that's a problem, but because I think I did set it up well for that. GIS type applications are finicky sometimes about if I said like the children files are not where they expect them to be, they don't work. And when relative differences have shifted that, and or even just the parent directories have shifted, it sometimes messes it up. I don't know how to break this really quick. What we'll do though, let's take a 5-minute break. Actually, let's make a 7-minute break. We'll come back at 11:05. And then we'll start going through the exercise. The exercise takes just shy of an hour, so it could actually take less than that. We did it in an hour last time comfortably. So, okay, good. Sounds like some people restart their computers and it works. Okay, so the question is if I'll just say it out loud since some people will be on there, is the question is, would you expect the RTK values to be closer to the green points if RTK was used? The answer is yes, they should be much closer, much closer. Elevational values for DJI drones is notoriously bad for geopositioning. Horizontal is great, but vertical, not so much.
And then, where do they get the directions on the screen?
What's that?
Someone wants to know. What
Oh, okay. I sent out a link this morning at about roughly 7 a.m. And the inside of that, there should be the exercise directions. I also sent out one yesterday with hands-on exercise directions in that as well. Yep, everything's going well, I think. Couple glitches on the computers, but nothing too surprising.
I was told there was one that just flat out doesn't work.
Yeah,
but
I'm gonna mute here.
it's probably gonna be-
All right, so we'll get going again. I'm not gonna, again, I want to let you work at your own paces a little bit. I just wanted to show you where the data was at, or what the application looked like when it came up. Only a couple other things that I'm going to really briefly touch on right now are a couple of the buttons and levers in Pix4D that you can refer to. And I want to give you just an orientation of the software itself, of where some of the buttons and levers are at where you want to go. Starting with the exercise, this should look pretty much just like what you have opened, hopefully, through the links that were sent out earlier. This is a Google Doc version of the PDF in case I need to make any changes in real time here for future reference. Going through this, there's where to download the data. There's some tiny URLs for about the data that might be interesting, because this came from my ranch up in El Dorado County. I say my ranch, really my family's ranch, over an area that has pretty serious bark beetle death going on. So I include what I've done, and this is from 2020. I did just a couple years ago. Okay, one question really quick. Does everybody have a handout? Okay, we're all good here. Okay, one more. Good. So there's these tiny URLs that you see in here are still good. They refer to the exercise directions. If you have a question, and particularly if you want to work on this at some kind of later time and you don't remember what I said, I've covered everything I will have covered here today in sometimes much more detail, or where I've looked through kind of a text of what I wanted to cover. So most of all the steps in this exercise are articulated under these tiny URLs. If I clicked on one of them, for example, and brought it up, you'll see a Google Drive link where you can either watch a video on that section of the exercise or download it for your reference. So that's particularly handy, again, for those of you that that might not make it all the way through, but you can refer to it at a later time. Or if you're virtual and you want to look at what button or lever to push to get to the next step, that's where you can find that information in detail. Throughout the exercise, you'll see again the C drive and where the data is at. If you have problems bringing it up, we just experimented on one of the computers in here, and it won't let you open up the project. You will navigate to your Pix4D exercise data, and within that you should find a data folder. Just says data. Click on that and then say okay, and you'll be able to continue. Hopefully those of you that are online shouldn't have that problem. Is there still a question over here? Okay, we're good. Okay, good. So that's how the directions are going through. We'll take every 15 minutes or so, we'll stop to let you work on it, or let you ask questions or get reoriented on the next steps. Might have some things to add, consolidating questions that we have, and otherwise I'll let you work at your own pace. Lastly, while we're in this project, I want to show you where a couple of the buttons and levers are at. Across the top, you have your images that are used to compile the project. Here they are here with the latitude, longitude, and altitude from the EXIF files that I mentioned earlier, as well as some accuracy stuff that isn't necessarily accurate. So that's in here. Sometimes you can enable or disable those images if you want to reprocess without, say, an image that's like whited out because of reflectance or something like that. That's no good. So here, there's yeah. So this is where we get the reference to the imagery. There's the GCP option, this one has already been loaded with GCPs. You'll get to that point in the exercise as well. You'll have different views that you can use to navigate. I have the sphere here. We can switch to just horizontal where you can shift it, and then you can have fly through where you can say okay and fly through the scene. So those are the core ones you use across the top for now. We won't worry about the reprocessing. There's explanations added in the text, but we won't be covering that today. Shifting downward, you'll see this is where you'll find your tie points under. These are your GCP tie points to orient your imagery. You'll see your cameras and your rays, which you can turn off and on, which are interesting. And you can also click on point clouds. So I can turn that on to get a densified point cloud of my area, which is really neat for navigating through. This is more interesting when you have an RGB imagery, but this is the densified point cloud. And if I shift to one of the other orientations, you can see how the 3D model of this area looks with a number of the dead pine trees in the middle of the study site. So you'll be able to do that within your project at certain steps to be able to look at it like this. Good. So that's just a little idea of what's across the top and across the bottom. So now we'll jump into the exercise. I am not going to lead all through all the steps because it's definitely difficult to have your have my screen and your screen and the exercise all on your window at the same time. There's just, again, too much real estate's used up. So what you'll do is go to that exercise that we were talking about. We'll start a new project using the exercise directions. That will probably be to step 2, creating a Pix4D project. Again, there's a URL at the top. Open your project and you can start a project name, something intuitive to yourself, but you don't have to worry about it being precisely what the directions say here, as long as you remember what it is. And the way that works, I'm going to close this out. Open Pix4D. You might have to go to your start menu and look through your files to find your Pix4D if it's just loaded on. When Pix4D first comes up, you will see, sometimes you'll see the most recent projects that you've worked on. I say sometimes because if you haven't used Pix4D before, then it won't have any past projects. Mine should have a couple, even though this is a brand new version I just uploaded the other day, and I don't usually use my personal laptop for this. But once this comes up, your old projects will show up below. And right now we're going to do new project. Using the default location for where to create your project is not what I advise. For now, what I'm going to do, because I'm going to select a different location in my C drive, and I'm going to put it in my trash right now, but I could do it in my DroneCamp too. DroneCamp, an intro to Pix4D. And that's where I'll create my Pix4D project. I think that's what the directions call for. For the name of your project, I'm going to just cut and copy and paste what I had from the directions here, a little metadata so your project makes sense. Just a side note, one of the reasons why we use the C drive instead of, say, your desktop is the desktop. Sometimes it's like 25 characters in length down the file pathway to get to your data. And there's a limit on how many characters you can have for the entire file length for your projects. From here, I'm going to say next. This is where you'll load in the imagery. What you would do is go into your project, go to your, not zero exercise, the actual exercise data, go to data, click 1, I might reduce this, Control A for control all. And I'll drag and drop those into the project. Once it's in, I'll click next. If you're not quite keeping up with me on this right now, it's okay. It's in the directions. I just want to get you running. There's here's some information about your imagery. One thing I usually recommend is to export, if you're going to use it in GIS later, export all the telemetry data to a CSV file, because then you can bring it into your GIS later for a reference of if you want to clip underneath the @nadir locations. But I won't worry about that right now. I'll just click next. It's going to give you a default coordinate system in UTM. Don't change this. There's no reason to. I almost wonder why it's here. Shouldn't need to ever put this information in. At least I've never had to change it before. Then you'll have a variety of templates that you can pick from. I have a couple custom ones. This standard art red edge for me, but then you can also have your 3D maps, your 3D modeling, and which are the two ones that you use the most, as well as your rapid ones, which are usually for spot testing in the field. We're just going to go with 3D maps for now, but even though 3D models might be of interest at some points, but 3D maps, and then finish. And then the data should come in. You might not see the red points until you scroll a little bit. Just another tip, if you don't have a mouse or a trackball, this is really hard to work in, just like it's usually really hard to work in most GIS without one of those, a device like that. So once the data is in here, then you've started your project. I recommend saving your project frequently. You can just go up to project and save project. Doesn't always save it at all steps. I'll let you all jump into the directions and work on from here. If you didn't go through all that, that is described starting at step 2 in the exercise. And you can move forward. If you have questions, ask them online. If you have questions in the classroom, ask them. And we will come around and help, and we'll revisit when it looks like people in here are getting to the next step in the exercise or having similar questions. Yes. Oh, good question. You'll see this in the directions. The question is, are you going to be creating new projects? Yes, you will create your own project, but we're not going to actually do the processing, because even though this is not a large project, it might take some computers an hour to process, and you just don't have that time in here. So what we did is we pre-processed everything. So when you get in the directions to where it says stop here, close your project, and click on the next step through step 1, then that's where you close it out and open it up, and that would be as if you just processed it using the steps that you did. Okay, I'm gonna just really quick. I see that everyone's cruising through this at the pace I was hoping for, so we're on a good glide path to finish up. But I want to just give a couple tips for the geopositioning that will help out a little bit. If you go to if you close out, this is the first project that I started. I'm going to close out of that where you get to the point in the directions where you say open up through step to step 2. I'm going to go in and find my correct file real quick. Do you see the intro of the Pix4D? Most of you have already done all of this. I'm going to go into my, where is it? Intro of the Pix4D, exercise data. Pix4D, you'll see these 2 files that are in there. Most of you have gone through step 1, where you then start putting in the GCPs. I'm going to open this up, throw in my GCPs really quick, and I'll show you how to a little bit more efficiently put in your GCP information, because there's a couple questions we have. The directions for this are in there, but it's not necessarily intuitive until you see it. As soon as this comes up, I will show you how to do those GCPs. Good, loading the data. Oh, here, wait, my pathway is broken. Good, I did break it. If this came up for you, I'll click OK. I'll just go back to exercise data, click on data, and select folder, and then it'll work, hopefully. Oh, the breakage, the reason for the breakage is because it's been moved from one computer to another, and the pathways that were originally like sound in the saved project, because it went from your C drive to your T drive, or from just the setup from the download to your computer, that's where it kind of broke. It just lost track of where the data was at in the move. Yes. Yeah, once you've opened Chris pointed out that once you have moved it and you've located it and you set that and you save your project, then you won't have to do that again unless you move your data again. So we put in the GCPs using the GCP points that are in the direction. So I'm going to import the GCPs, browse, and that is up in the GPS data folder for the directions. Most of you have probably got through this point. I'll say okay. And you'll see those blue points show up on there. I'll switch to my ray cloud on the far left-hand side of my screen, and I'll expand this even larger so you can see better. You can turn off the cameras in the rays. You may have done this already as well. I sometimes prefer to use the sphere, but it's not necessary really. So I can just look down on the points more easily. I expand the GCPs, which most of you it appears have got to this point. And now I want to set those GCPs, and I click on this button. This is where the directions, it's like you can't really see, it doesn't look intuitive until you see it. I can enlarge the image so I have a larger point. I roll out using my the roller on my mouse to find whatever is the closest GCP, come in and click, and it'll put a spot down. If I don't like that spot, I can click delete on my, or click the delete button to delete it and put it back down. So usually you want to do at least 5 GCPs of different image points. Remember, this image here is image 1, 2, like going down the list, 3, 4. Those are images that were taken at the same time because the multispectral camera actually has 5 cameras that simultaneously snap. So you'll want to go to the next one that has the first 4 numbers on here are the ones that you want to shift to. So if I go to then 0056, zoom out, find the image and click it, that would be preferable. One more thing, sometimes you'll get in there, I'll go down to another image and it's hard to spot where the image is. You can press the space bar and it'll bring it all the way up. If you can't see the X because there's trees in the way, skip it, move on to you can press the space bar to get back and then move down further. We don't need to do this very long. I just want you to get used to where you put in your GCPs. And once you understand the concept, then what you would normally do is you would apply the points on the right. And once you've done at least 4 GCPs, normally, you don't have to do that today, you would go up to the top and you'd click the re-optimize. Do not do that right now. If you can see on my screen where it's up at the top left-hand corner-ish, you'd do re-optimize. That'll take about 5 minutes to run. You don't need to waste the time to do that, because after you've re-optimized, then you would go down to your processing and then you would uncheck the first step of processing and check the next steps of processing and run it from there on out. So, and we're not going to do that today because that processing could take a while.
Just to show you one more thing in here. So after you found mark 2 of these, if you click this here on the right side up at the top, if you click that, it will adjust all the pictures so they're it's like should be pretty close to the center, so it's easier to find them after marking 2. But it saves me a bunch of time because I have to do these all the time, but it just sort of rearranges the photos so you're not hunting for them. They should show up closer to the middle of the screen here. So you have to hunt and find the first and second one.
That was a great point, Chris. I sometimes forget these little ones, these little tips sometimes that I take for granted. So yes, that's on the right side of your screen where it has a little expand X. It'll reorient to where it thinks those points should be. And that's a great tip. Once you have selected some of these, again, usually at like 4 or 5 different locations, and then you do the re-optimize, which I'm not going to do because it'll take a while, you would end up closing out of the project after you would have normally started set run or started it. I'm going to close this out, discard my work because I don't need to add something. And then I would go through step 3. And it'll take a little bit for this to come up because this is the fully processed project. And I'm going to use this just to show where you're going with after you do the calibration. Oh, I have to fix my pathway too. All right. Data, select folder. Good. I don't want to have to load in my spectral panels and so forth. You don't, by the way, you don't need to close down yours if you're not to this point. I just want to show you where you're going. One of the things that I want to do is bring up the processing options at the bottom just to orient you to what this means, because now it's pretty relevant. Well, it's actually relevant from the beginning. Sometimes I'll click advanced at the bottom. You can adjust these different parameters for your processing here with your matching, free flight or terrestrial or aerial grid. If it doesn't process with one matching, it'll sometimes process with the other one better. The point cloud and mesh, I removed a number of different things in here, but this is one of the places where you can do point cloud classification, which helps give you better rendered results. But most importantly, because now we're looking at step 3 is what your products might be, we would go to your index calculator. And by the way, this is one of the steps that you might not be able to do if you're on one of the temporary licenses. If I go into calibrate, I can see what the target is using this box code, QR code. You can it should recognize what the calibration value is for that given target. But if it doesn't, sometimes you have to manually look that up and put it in. The way you put these in here is you just click, 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 click with your left, and then right click to close the polygon for the reference for that point. Again, the processing options down in the bottom corner is where you can see these. And I mentioned earlier, and this might not be in the directions where Shane noted that this is a hungry computational application. You can adjust the amount of RAM and the amount of CPU threads that you are going to run, so you can do something else while you work on this. If you move it down too far, if you run out of RAM for your project, it'll start reading and writing from your hard drive, which can exponentially increase the processing time of your project. So you gotta have a certain amount of RAM to do processing, but so what Shane just said is that if you have a project that is fairly large, leave these to run full speed, set it to run when you go to sleep, and then hopefully it's ready for you the next day. That's one of the ways that we usually go about it. Good. I just wanted to show you those tips of how to do your GCPs and how to do your multispectral panels, just to, for a visual. Good.
A question in the chat. Where does the calibration image come from?
Oh, so the question is where does the calibration image come from? When you collect field data with a multispectral cameras always come, or pretty much always come with a white reference panel that you'll put on the ground. And right before you launch or right after you launch, you'll hold your drone over that target where it's not shaded. And on the application associated with the camera, you'll tell it to snap a picture of this white target. That way that image is, think of it as like white balancing, but more robust, because it'll help calibrate the camera, but it also calibrating the imagery thereafter for the immediate lighting conditions. So yes, please continue with the exercise, and if I have other like questions that I can answer for everybody, then I will be right back and I'll go on mute for now. Okay, I'm getting the sense that most of you have are getting through the process pretty nicely. You've figured out the GCPs, at least the workflow for it. The image calibration to reflectance seems to be pretty intuitive for it's not a difficult step. It almost is done for you. So that's not challenging, it appears. Pix4D has actually made that easier and easier because it automates part of that process now where it didn't used to. So once you actually have your project together, I wanted to answer a couple questions that people were wondering about. And one was your ray cloud. When it comes together and looks like this, I've got my densified ray cloud. And I'm going to switch to this. I turn off my cameras maybe. And the question was, how can you make this look red, green, and blue? And the answer is, I'm afraid not here at least. That's this is just going to be showing you your near infrared layer in the grayscale. But what you can do is you can go into the point cloud drop downs on the far left side in that little layers pane. Go far down and you can switch these into some different types of ways of looking at it, some of which are more interesting than others. That might look nice, maybe not, but you can change into like a thermal or elevation pattern, but not, you can't do RGB, I'm afraid, in here. But that leads actually to the next question that some people had is, when this is done, what is the output, or how does the output work? Once you've done the GCPs and you've re-optimized, and once you put in the calibration panels and you go to your processing options, the final step, so there's 3 steps. There's the initial processing, just to kind of get a loose stitch. There's a point cloud and mesh, which I wish they would just kind of combine 2 and 3 together, because you usually don't do anything between 2 and 3. And then step 3 is the DSM orthomosaic index collection or processing. Inside of there's a couple check marks that you can do. You can say you can merge your tiles, which should usually be automatically selected. If you are creating an orthomosaic, which we're doing indices, we don't need to worry about doing an orthomosaic with the multispectral. An RGB image, though, you'd want to leave this checked like this, and you would check geotiff without the transparency, so you don't get that 4th band, that red, green, blue blank layer that's unnecessary. So if you're doing an RGB, you would uncheck that. Additional outputs, this is where you click the DTM, the digital terrain model, which is calculated by separating or subtracting stuff above the ground, usually based upon recognition that the change of inclination is too steep, and therefore that object should just be sliced off and to blur smooth to the ground level. What in LiDAR would be called the last return of points. So the furthest out points that smooths across. Finally, the index calculator, we already have this information in here, but if you go down, I check reflectance map, merge tiles, and then red to red, green to green, blue to blue, but then you also get your normalized difference vegetation index that automatically calculates that for you. And once all of that is checked and all of these are checked up here, then you would say, okay, go down to your processing, and you would check your last steps. And normally you would run the project, then that's where you get through step 3. After you've gone through that processing, and it might take 12 hours, that's when you go into the folder. You look inside of your index folder and your indices, and you've got your blue layer, your green layer, your red layer, all the layers, including your NDVI. To turn that into an RGB image, or a false color image for that matter, in the GIS, and I believe this is in the exercise that Shane will be teaching this later this afternoon, you have to do something called composite bands, which will merge each one of these products. So inside of this blue, you would merge that into with the green, which is spatially co-located. The pixels are lined up. Why the software doesn't just do it for you, that would save a lot of time, but they're not GIS and this stuff that much. So there's but this is where your products would be, and this is where you'd pull them in and drop them into your GIS project for further analysis and imagery or visualization. Good. So with that, we have another question over here. Yes. Oh, so what the question was is the point cloud classification is classifying things incorrectly, like a tree is being classified as a building. And the question is, can you correct that? The answer is to that is no, you don't need to. It's you wouldn't rely on this classification anyways. This is a very loose classification that helps correct the digital terrain model. It's not really used. It's kind of in under the hood for the products at the end. And if a little bit of it's wrong, that's almost to be expected, because it's not using what's called a supervised classification system. It's unsupervised. It's just naturally through some kind of parameterization, it's figuring out what it should be in theory. It helps improve the results a little bit for your digital terrain model, but not as much as you might think. Good. And with that, I'll check to make sure there's any questions on the online session. And again, I'll leave you with this. I know that it sounds like I kind of, especially for the first hour, I fire hose you with a lot of information. And if you want to kind of get that in sort of in more digestible bits through the exercise, I would recommend checking out these tiny URLs for the processing steps. They covered all the things, or pretty much all the things I covered here, and then more. I didn't want to do the and more here because I wanted you to get your hands dirty at the application a little bit more. But yeah, thank you all. Good questions all around. And we are about ready for lunch.
This is Pix4D Mapper. Pix4D has several different products, and so they have, any of you that do ag type of stuff, if you're interested, I also have Pix4D Fields, which is not, it's much simpler to use, and it's gotten a lot better since they released it. I have it on my laptop, so if you want to see what it looks like at some point over the next 2 days or 3 days, I guess, I'm happy to show you some of the stuff I have, but it processes much quicker. You can't really change settings to exactly the way you want them, but if I'm in the field, I can get a map to show a grower in about 20 minutes with a NDVI or whatever indices I want to calculate out of that. Yes. That depends on if you're work for an educational institution or in private industry. We're able to purchase it. I think I pay I think $2,000, and then I pay about $200 a year to get updates and technical support. I don't know that you in the private industry, I think it's more like $5,000 bucks. And then they have, there's cloud computing options. You can actually do the processing in the cloud, but then they charge you the number of images. Every time I look at it, I'm like, oh, I don't have enough money to pay for that. Because yeah. And some of these pricing's weird. I mean, some of them it's almost like a subscription. You have to pay a monthly fee whether you use it or not. So
great. That was all great points. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to shoot the emails This week, I'm barely looking in like anything other than like fires that are burning kind of emails, because we're busy with the event largely. But if you do have questions and you're working through this, IGIS has office hours on Mondays and Tuesdays where we can help sort out your questions there as well. You just go to the UCANR-IGIS website. If you Google that and office hours, it should get you to where you need to go. And there is no cost to that, and it's open to all of you that are in the event. Yes. It's for everyone, not just UCANR people. You have a question? So the question is, can you add other indices into the Pix4D processing? The answer is no, unless it's the format of the NDVI, like NDRI is you can shift which ones are designated, but by default, no, you can't change it.
Yes.
Yes, where the ArcGIS goes. What's that?
Yeah, you can put in a index formula and the Pix4D.
That's on the,
Generate it and have it.
oh, there's, oh, yes, of course, the updates to the index calculator. Yes. So the answer to that is yes. Can you create new, I forgot that was added in there in one of the version updates. I've always done this in ArcGIS Pro, but yes, there is an index calculator that you can add that information in there. That's the last tab on the left. I still would do it in GIS, but still it might be easier here. Oh yeah, I wish there was a way to do that. So the question is, if you mark a feature in the ray cloud, can you go to it on the map and see where that's at? And the answer is, I'm afraid not. I've never seen a way that you can do that. All right, it looks like it's good, and it's about lunchtime. One more question. Yes, so the question is this recorded? It is recorded, and it will be online. And also the URLs in the exercise really spell all of this out in chunks that are really well set up, if I say so myself, having done them. Awesome. Well, I guess it is going to be lunchtime. We're going to be shutting down the Zoom unless there's any last questions on there. So we're good to go. Thank you all.